5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Miglosh for the Wisconsin DMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing. Let's dig in. Okay, here we go. Okay, Grant Johnson, who's on the board of the WDMA, had an article he posted on LinkedIn about fake faces and how that works. Hey, Phoenix. And I wanted to I dug into it a little more because Grant's it wasn't moving. So I wanted to see what the stuff looked like. So I'll give you a little taste of it. It's just fantastic. Here we go. You can pick this up anywhere, but
this input drives the animation of the face in the video shown on the monitor to the left.
Is making weird faces.
A significant difference to previous methods is the re-rendering of the mouth interior. To this end, we resynthesized the mouth interior of the target actor using video footage from the training sequence based on temporal and photometric similarity.
But look how it all works.
As we can see, we are able to generate a realistic and convincing reenactment result.
Watch these two. Look at that. That's
Here
fantastic.
we show a close-up of the footage from the previous live reenactment. The input video stream is shown on the left. Note
it's 6 minutes of this. It's kind of dopey, but I understand that with just a few, 30 seconds of voice, you can actually recreate the voice as well with just as much reality. Can you imagine somebody could hack my account and they could give false, fake marketing news? Not that it isn't mostly fake news anyway. That's part of the fun of marketing. But, we're not going to be able to believe anything. When a leaked video from 1999 of Joe Biden comes out saying that he's against who knows what, or vice versa, either party, it's going to be such maybe the worst side, and this was in one of the articles I read. Maybe the worst side is all the politicians can deny it was them and say that it was just one of these fake videos. So they're completely off the hook. Even if we got them cold on camera with a real video, you can't tell the difference. Wow, what does that do to our epistemology? Okay, then I'm going to kick off with, here's some of the best Super Bowl ads. We're going to do the first 3 on here because they're too good. Oops. That is so gross.
Like that. It's going to be amazing.
Oh, God. Oh. This is a disaster. Who's the genius who puts a girl in heels on a subway grate?
Miss Monroe, eat a Snickers.
Why?
You get a little cranky when you're hungry.
Miss Monroe.
Better?
Much better.
This scene will never make the cut.
It'll never make the cut. This was kind of dumb. I don't like this one.
You look good.
Let's try and skip ahead.
Hey! See the guy taking my little girl out, huh?
Yep.
Huh.
This one made me cry, so let's skip to the made me cry one. Okay, this is the big brother, and he's kind of a jerk. Bugging his little brother, which I did, so I kind of like that one.
Road to rediscover. Hey, brother, know the water's sweet, but blood is thicker. Oh, the sky comes falling down.
You think it's brother, but it's some jerky bullies. Here comes the brother. Uh-oh. Yeah, beat him up.
What if I'm far from home? Oh, brother, I will hear you call.
Because you got to beat up your little brother, but you got to also stand by him. That's right. I like that part, too.
And there's your beautiful baby.
Any day now. Really? You're eating Doritos? He's eating Doritos on my ultrasound. Do you see what I have to do?
I know.
Give me that.
And there's your beautiful baby.
Oh, it's repeating. That's the best one ever. That's got to be the best Super Bowl ad ever. It's terrible. I admit it. It's terrible. Sorry. I apologize for that. I just thought that makes me cry too, because it's so funny. Okay, let's get to serious stuff. As usual, I got to get over to serious stuff. Okay, did you know? I didn't know, so admit it. Thailand is passing the Personal Data Protection Act. And this is a very detailed article that talks about how it's heavily borrows from the GDPR, which we've spent, hours discussing. And the main things are that you have to gain explicit consent before collecting and using personal data. And, they don't ask me much. And I found out that the WDMA is sharing data with Facebook this week. You might have missed that show. I don't know. I didn't know that was happening. See, I have a WordPress. Somebody said, you should figure this out. They called me up. I said, what I think it is that I'm using a standard WordPress template and some WordPress apps. And somehow that is connected with Facebook, though I don't remember doing it. I cleared it out now, and we're going to revisit that in a couple of weeks and see which of the 46 websites that are sharing data with Facebook are back again. That'll be interesting because, I'm just browsing like normal. It's really hard to tell what's going on out there. And I think, this article is really good because it basically says marketers, first of all, it's a ripple effect across the Asia Pacific. But it's a shift in data perception. It's like, who says you can track me all over the place? Who says you can? And everybody thinks because Apple and Google have stopped third-party cookies, that makes it better. It doesn't even affect it. Third-party cookies were just shorthand for following you around. But now they can just do what Facebook does and get sites to share. And then they know when you're there or not. So it's a little harder, and if you get enough of a group together, you get the same basic idea. So, but the truth is, more and more countries are adopting privacy protection laws, and states in the United States. So this is a relentless regulatory tide. Yes, it is. And this guy says, rather than being upset about it as marketers, why don't you embrace it and behave yourself? Well, the trouble is that over the last decade, minute targeting has become standard for digital ads. But this guy believes it's time for a welcome change by applying a new logic and releasing ad targeting from the confines of aligning with individual profiles, meaning individual personal profiles. Marketers and brand managers can open up greater possibilities for enjoyable experiences and deeper connections through context-centric advertising. You know what that means? You advertise on sites that make sense. It's back to mass media, folks. That's where digital always has really been, and it belongs. If you want to target, do mail. And GDPR and the UK have recognized that it's not about mail. Mail is public information. We know where you live. We know your postal code. We know what kind of neighborhood it is. You can do whatever you want with that stuff. That's what we've always done. That has 50 years of track record where consumers don't seem to mind it too much. Plus, one thing about mail is it's expensive, so the mailer never wants to mail one extra catalog more than he needs to get his business going, right? So that's self-limiting, like the invisible hand from Adam Smith. Okay, so here was an interesting article. And I don't have the whatever. I look at too many magazines, and Media Post has a lock feature premium service. But I thought that the title itself was really interesting. Hispanics show strong preference for English language media. My wife learned Italian, and I said, well, why didn't your mom teach you Italian? And she said, well, because when Grandpa came over on the boat, he was so excited to be in America. He said, no Italian. We're going to speak English in this house. Well, he probably didn't say it like that. We're going to speak the English. All my kids are Italian. I'm good. Anyway, I'm not supposed to laugh at my own jokes. So, different media, they do give me this piece of this. Shows here, 50, 63, 58%, 49, 48. What's this one? It's hard to read this. Listening to music. Okay, so they like Hispanic music. That's not a surprise. But in movies, sports, search engines, reading, and social influencers, they're all either at 50% or above. Okay? And the blue is Spanish. And very small. Only 15, never 20% prefer Spanish. Fascinating, right? This is bilingual. So some of them like bilingual. Some like bilingual music is the biggest hit. That's fantastic because, we have Hispanic language and Hispanic geodemographics in our standard geodemographic package of about 300 variables. And it rarely works. And this may shine light on that. Fantastic. So that was a cool little item, just to note. Okay, here, Facebook ad growth declines. I thought it was about Facebook ad sales declining. No, it's their growth went from 27% down to 21%. Their growth is still over 20% a quarter. God help us. Year over year, I guess. Oh my gosh, that wasn't even worth looking at. Sometimes that clickbait is difficult. Okay, so now we're going to talk about data-driven marketing. Your data-driven marketing is harmful. I should know. I ran marketing at Google and Instagram. And Eric has reached out to me, and so we're going to hopefully do a live stream where he can undo the damage. But as I said yesterday, I guessed that he was running out of room, and he has a word count. And this is a 15-minute read, so it's a long article. But we got about halfway through it, so I'll kind of recap it, and we'll go down to the PDF, which has the highlights. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so in the beginning, they were doing employee evaluation, and they were ranking people. Exceeds expectations, meets expectations, doesn't meet expectations. And he said the low end, basically, after a few training efforts, gets fired. And HR came in and said, you really need to do a bell curve. It was interesting because I watched a TED Talk on math, and they reminded girls that they were girls, and they did worse at math. And they reminded girls that they were Asian girl, and they did better at math. Nothing else changed. They just took Asian girls' data set, and if they told them, remember, you're Asian, you're good at math, their math scores went up. If they said, you're a girl, you're not good at math, their math scores went down. Fantastic. Really, really interesting study. We need to hear more about this kind of thing. But what was interesting was that the professor said that when she started, she did a stats course, college level stats course, and she said, some of you may not be. It was required for something. Some of you may not think you're good at math, but stats is totally different, and I think you're going to enjoy this, and you're going to be good at it. And through the course of teaching this a couple times, she's had many, many kids come and say, I got a B in your class. I've never gotten a B in any class. Now, we're going to assume that I always was against grading on a curve, because all it took was one or two great, smart kids, and you never could get an A. I made it through college with AB average, a 3.501. Oh, man. And then I decided to aim for that because the first semester I thought I was getting a 4.0, but they had just introduced an AB, which counted 3.5 instead of 4. And I got straight ABs because somebody messed up the curve, and I was probably smarter. I'll think that to my grave. Anyway, so a bell curve, as Eric points out, doesn't quite fit. Especially if you're Google, you can hire anybody on earth, call them up and say, we want you, and they'll come. How do you weed that out? I mean, you weed it out on attitude, or you weed it out on boss preference or something. Doesn't like your hair, because performance just may not. They should all be superior performers. It's hard. And so Eric realized that data per se, the curve you apply doesn't necessarily benefit you. My argument in RFM, if you look at my book, Spinning Straw into Gold, I argue that most scoring methods are detrimental to insight. They mask things rather than expanding your insight on a particular variable. Yeah. Anyway, back to the professor. So the professor, at the end, she said, yeah, statistics is different. It's harder. And yet these kids were getting Bs who had never gotten above a C or a D in math. Okay, so the important point is, it's not data per se, I think, Eric. It's how you apply the data. And most application of data is garbage. That's what your article says, and I agree 100%. Okay, so he talks about a breakthrough that he had. His dad got murdered, as we left off last time, and so he threw himself into his work, and he came up with a two-dimensional perspective on data and how a business is run. And I thought that looked good, but Eric, I really would like to see that as a graph, at least as an economic graph. Economic graphs, have no scale. They just talk about positive or negative correlation as the variables change, because they don't know what the scale is or what the slope is. So they just draw an angle. Never mind. I'm going to get in trouble today, man. Okay. So Eric, I was kind of hoping it toward the end that Eric would get to. He says there's been this pendulum swing from, if you grew up watching Bewitched, and Darren, I think his name was, or Daryl, would not have an ad program and then come up with some inspiration and the client would buy it. One definition, as David Ogilvy says in his book, Confessions of an Ad Man, one definition of good advertising is what the client approves. But, when Ogilvy got going, most of advertising had very little data behind it. Now, never mind that Claude Hopkins wrote scientific advertising back in the 20s. So it's literally 100 years old, and he cites direct mail, 50 years of direct mail history, saying we know what works. And so that's kind of, David actually cites Claude Hopkins as one of his inspirations. Ogilvy also worked at Gallup Poll and learned about polling and learned about measurement of ideas and of sales and all these sorts of things, and how you can measure big changes. So, but what happened is that we went from this perspective of what you need is a breakthrough creative, and I worked at an agency that did that, and I learned a lot. We helped Dominic's Food fend off Cub Foods. Cub Foods would come into a market, drop all their prices 6%, undercut everybody by 6%, and others would try to match it, and then because their margins are so thin in grocery stores, they would slowly raise them, and then Cub would raise them. They would always keep a 2 or 3% differential. Well, so instead of matching them on price, my agency had Dominic's do big ads about the quality and how they cared more about produce and meat. It's kind of a precursor to Whole Foods, and it really worked, and it drove Cub out of the market. Great. So I am not saying creativity is wrong, but in the 80s we were trying to bring database marketing, direct marketing techniques, and I'm still a fan. Direct marketing is the greatest idea that's never been implemented. When I was getting going in the early 90s as a speaker and author, we couldn't put on enough seminars. They were packed. The conventions were packed. Everything was packed in the early 80s through about until the internet revolution. And then everybody wanted to go digital. But so many companies, my ad agency included, would embrace the language of direct marketing, but not the actual practice. So anyway, Eric has cautionary tales about Audi running a Super Bowl ad about empowering young women, but its entire board consisted of older men. That's not uncommon. Gillette produced an ad aimed at tackling toxic masculinity without any regard for how it made its core customer men feel like embarrassed. It's not even, that was bad. I hated that, but I don't buy Gillette anyway. But apparently sales are up, so I guess it worked in certain sense. Okay, so one of the challenges with both mass media and the way we use data in marketing and advertising is there's not much recognition that there are humans on the other end. And here's where Eric and I part company. He suggests as we go on, the temptation is to move away from individuals and look for human patterns in the tangled web of data. Correct? But first, we should acknowledge that there are living, feeling human beings at the end of every transaction. I'm okay with that. But then he moves into the RFM trap, where he says a relationship can develop. And here's where we part company. Most of the things I buy them because I need them. I buy them where I can get them most conveniently and quickest and low price. Okay? I want quality, I want price, I want delivery. Do I have a relationship with the brand? Not much. I've never believed that the relationship word applies to vendors. Not really. You better work really hard if you're a vendor, and I've been one, just to keep in touch. Because most of my clients didn't really want to know what I thought. They wanted me to produce models that drove sales and growth. And even when I did, then they'd sell the company and I'd get kicked out. So there was not a relationship. Not really. And with brands, it's even more distant. So hopefully David will come on and undo that damage. And he talked about how that can map into the central idea. Now it's interesting because he mentions Nike, which says if you have a body, you're an athlete. I can tell you, Eric, I'm not an athlete anymore. I was at one time, but I still have a body. But you could only make that work with a really bad definition of athlete that would not apply in the real world. And interesting, he cites Nike. I read an article. I don't think I posted it, but it talked about how a guy was looking for a particular kind of shoe because he was going to go like hundreds of miles through the Himalayas or some crazy thing. And he went to the Himalaya climber shoe store, and he was going to just buy a pair of Nikes. And the salesperson showed him this other pair of specially built Himalayan mountain shoes. And he came out with those. And he was talking about how great they were. Okay? So Nike may be a little too broad. I wanted to point that out. It's always a balance. It's always a temptation. Mark Ritson says you got to spend about about 40% of your marketing budget on measurable data stuff and about 60% on brand long term. Think long term. And I think that's an interesting balance. And Ritson seems to be about the smartest guy I know. So anyway, I also agree with this, Eric. People need to understand why you get out of bed in the morning. That may not sell shoes. The passion, the vision will fall on deaf ears without persuasion. Right. And the best way for it to fall on to be persuasive is scientific advertising. Claude Hopkins, a 100-year-old book, who talks about how the direct mailers figure that out. What we do is we let the marketplace tell us what works. And ultimately, you get smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. Isolating causal variables, field valid experiments, and always test something. That's what gets me out of the bed in the morning. Have a great day. I'm John Miglosh. I don't get any hearts. I don't know. I thought that was going to help reveal my passion. Have a great day. I think your friends will think you're smart.